And we're back in the car like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your rainy, miserable, but at least it's not 20 degrees, Sunday afternoon here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Today will be the newest entry, or I should say today will mark the newest entry in our continuing series of the best movie you've never seen. And I'm also going to spotlight a stand-up comic, actor, and filmmaker who I would say if you're under 35, you've probably never even heard of this guy, who was responsible for this movie. The film is 1987's hysterically funny comedy, 88% on Rotten Tomatoes, Hollywood Shuffle. The writer, actor, producer, director, answers D, all three, is Robert Townsend. Now, Robert Townsend was a stand-up comic. He was known as a stand-up comic first. And then, as he was trying to make his way and meet as many people as possible in the world of stand-up comedy, and you meet other people, I believe he met Eddie Murphy, other people in the same boat as far as you can book stand-up gigs, but you try to get cast in major motion pictures. It's not so easy now. It was even more difficult back then. So Robert Townsend in the mid-1980s had an idea for a motion picture, a film comedy, kind of a lighthearted, gentle poke at the movie business and Hollywood. And he targeted it at the African-American community of young actors who were desperately trying to break into whichever end of the business it might be, by making it a satire, by creating these kind of outrageous vignettes, which have, there's stuff in this movie, it's surrealist, it's Salvador Dali fantasy, it's farce, it has some broad sight gags in the realm of Airplane or the Naked Gun movies. The humor allows him to make the points that he wants to make in a more sort of palatable concoction than if he had turned this into an angry screed or railing against the movie business. But it isn't just that he made the movie. It's how Robert Townsend made the movie. And it's the fact that he managed to put together, for the time, an expensive-looking film, not only for less than $100,000, circa 1986-87 era, but he showed what people could do if they took advantage of the technology of that day. In this instance, he was a young man with, this is ridiculous, but he had good credit. And he was able to sign up for a bunch of credit cards, and he maxed out every credit card, literally maxed them all out. He called in as many favors from the people he had met up to that point in his life in the movie business. He was very young at the time. He was in his mid-20s at this juncture. And he borrowed every foot of film that he could find. And I'm pretty sure Spike Lee helped him out. And Spike was a guy who was just getting going himself. But I think that he may have gotten the equivalent of a film can of unused film from Spike Lee or somebody connected to Spike. I feel like I read that. So he made this high gloss looking Hollywood production for under $100,000 all in. And it wound up grossing well over $5 million at the box office. And you start to do the math and you say, this guy made a movie that grossed more than 50 times its production cost. He made a film which was a critical darling, an independent film, detailing the experience that he, Robert Townsend, and many other actors of that era went through. And he doesn't take shots at Eddie Murphy, but Eddie Murphy, without appearing in the film, almost feels like a secondary or tertiary character, because so many young actors, such as Robert Townsend, when they would go to auditions, it almost didn't matter what the movie was for, whether it was a Beverly Hills Cop sequel, whether it was The Golden Child, it doesn't even matter. They were told, we're looking for an Eddie Murphy type. And there's nothing wrong with saying that, but presumably if you hear the same exact thing on 15 different auditions, where sometimes movies weren't comedies, sometimes they were period dramas, historical pieces. You're looking for an Eddie Murphy type? What the fuck are you talking about? he puts all of this into his movie. And he also had it just a hysterically funny, it's about 6 or 7 minutes of the film. It's a short movie. When I say short, meaning it's under an hour and a half, Hollywood Shuffle. He has this amazing mock-up of the old Siskel and Ebert TV show. Now, I tell you, there are, and this is not, again, a criticism, there are people that if you are fans of a certain figure in life, if you kind of worship a certain figure in life, as I all but idolized Roger Ebert, the famous film critic, a Pulitzer Prize winner with the Chicago Sun-Times, who ended up hosting the famous TV program Siskel and Ebert with his counterpart at the Chicago Tribune, Gene Siskel. Now, by the mid-1980s, both Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert were very famous, and they were popular. Their show was syndicated all over the country, and they became celebrities. And by the point in time that Hollywood Shuffle went before the cameras and, Townsend's screenplay and everything was all done, they were big players in Hollywood, but not above being lampooned and not above having a sense of humor about themselves. It's an important point, because if the target of your satire doesn't appreciate it, it might be a problem. And then you might have a weird situation like what happened a decade later when Weird Al Yankovic did a parody of Coolio, remember him? The famous Coolio song, Gangsta's Paradise. And Weird Al did just an unbelievable parody called Amish Paradise. I think that it's probably the best thing that Weird Al ever did, even better than Eat It when he first came on the scene. But in that instance, Weird Al did this parody song of Coolio, and he did it in just an unbelievable way. And when it came out, when Coolio was asked, well, what do you think of this? He said words to the effect of, this is bullshit, this fucking sucks. He didn't have the right to do this, and he destroyed my song, or words to that effect. And Weird Al, who never seems to lose his temper at any of the artists that he lampoons, Weird Al just said, well, I don't know why he's so mad. He cashed the check. That was the end of that controversy. He cashed the check. He knew what it was. He knew what was going on. Maybe he just didn't like what Al did with his song, but he had permission, was the point. In this instance, in Hollywood Shuffle, Robert Townsend did not seek prior permission from Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert. And he has this fantasy sequence where Robert Townsend's main character, his name is Bobby Taylor in the world of the movie. He's a very likable young man, hardworking, goes on tons of auditions, and he does what a lot of actors going back 100 years or more, when they're not working, they work in the food service industry in some capacity, as a waiter, as a general manager of a McDonald's, whatever it is. You got to do what you got to do. And this movie gets into that. But Bobby Taylor has big dreams, and he has these kinds of fantasies where we actually see them represented. And one of the fantasies that he has is hosting a TV show a la Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, discussing the movies of the day that might be in theaters at the time. And instead of calling it Siskel and Ebert at the movies or sneak previews or whatever, he decides to call it Sneakin' at the Movies. And he and one of his friends from the film, in this fantasy sequence, they are basically sneaking into the movies. They're not paying to get in, but they're reviewing movies nevertheless. And they're kind of gently trolling Siskel and Ebert. There's no question about it. They are having fun with the concept of what Siskel and Ebert did. And to the credit of Gene and Roger, may they both rest in eternal cinematic paradise. They are two of my favorite people. I adored Roger Ebert especially. Roger Ebert loved the movie Hollywood Shuffle, and he was not offended. He didn't get angry and think, oh, this little guy, this punk didn't have the right. No, he thought that parody was right on the button. And the film is made up of a number of those kinds of spoof short films, if you will. And many of them do poke fun at the experience of a lot of actors that they went through in the 70s and 80s, dealing and having to take part in these sort of trash exploitation kind of films. And then you ask a question, which is a real question. It's not phony. It's not people just pretending to search for meaning or anything like that. But how badly do you want to work? Is it so important to do this right now that you're going to kind of turn on your core values and act like it doesn't matter? So in the world of the film, Bobby goes on one audition after another, does beautiful work, but he really doesn't get cast. And then finally he gets cast as the lead in this ridiculous film where he's going to play like a drug kingpin. And it's so bad, it's such pure garbage. But it's work, it's money. He wants to make money. He's a young guy. He's still living at home. I really shouldn't say anything because I lived at home until I was well in my 30s. But he wants to make money. And, there is the chance that you could do something that is way beneath you. It might lead to better things. But even in that instance, do you really want to make a movie where you're playing a drug kingpin who has like a harem of women? And it's beyond ridiculous. But in the world of the film, it's presented as, well, this movie could be made. It would be like Scarface, only 1,000,000 times worse. So his grandmother, I think the name of the actress was Helen Johnson. I'm not sure about that. But the grandmother keeps telling him, you don't need to do this. Maybe another time, but you don't need to do this. There's work at the post office. And a running theme in the movie is that circa mid-1980s, post office is hiring in almost every city. There's always work at the post office. So this is kind of in the back of our mind as we watch the movie, because generally speaking, whether it's a major Hollywood feature or an independent film such as Hollywood Shuffle, when a line gets repeated, it's going to come into play at some point. And in the world of Hollywood Shuffle, it does. It comes into play towards the end of the film in a really clever and funny way. So Robert Townsend, after the success of Hollywood Shuffle, this is why I said that the movie doesn't take shots at Eddie Murphy. Eddie Murphy does not come off badly in this film, even from a conceptual standpoint. Eddie loved the movie. And without reading a quote, because you can look it up, you know how I know Eddie Murphy loved the movie? Because later in 1987, Eddie Murphy Raw, that was the concert film that Eddie recorded early in his tour. I think it was recorded early 87. I'm not 100% on that. But Eddie has always said to this day that they shot the concert film too soon. He thought that the show got better the more that he was out there. But Eddie Murphy Raw was a hit, and it was directed by Robert Townsend. So if Eddie had any kind of beef, he didn't. Because he's not hiring the same guy to direct that movie if he has a problem with him. This is just being logical. So Robert Townsend, he actually starred or co-starred in a movie right after. So this is what I talk about, where one project that might suck can lead to something great. In the case of Hollywood Shuffle, it's a really good movie. Funny as hell. A lot of big laughs. I would say up to that point, the only movie that I think I laughed harder at was the original Airplane. And Hollywood Shuffle has a huge rewatchability factor. But because of the success of Hollywood Shuffle and the kind of credibility of Eddie Murphy handpicking Robert Townsend to direct Eddie Murphy Raw, Robert Townsend was cast in a movie called The Mighty Quinn, which I think came out in late 1988. I'm not 100% on that. So maybe a year and a half after Hollywood Shuffle, kind of landed. The Mighty Quinn is not so much notable for Robert Townsend's strong supporting performance, which is real. He gives a great supporting performance. It was based on a book called The Search for Maubie. And Robert Townsend plays Maubie. He's the guy that everyone in the movie is looking for. Why The Mighty Quinn is such a notable film is that it's just about Denzel Washington's first major leading role in a Hollywood film. And to say that Denzel knocks it out of the park is an understatement. Again, Roger Ebert, who was a Denzel fan before anybody else, and he said, this kid's got something. I can't put my finger on it, but he's got something. After A Soldier Story, Cry Freedom with Kevin Kline, which was 87. Mighty Quinn is a really good movie, and Ebert had it as one of his 10 best films of its year. And the interplay between Robert Townsend and Denzel Washington, they're supposed to be lifelong friends who have kind of lost touch. They feel like lifelong friends. Townsend was a really solid film actor on top of being a pretty funny stand-up comic and somebody who had a good eye for filmmaking. And must have been a hell of a people person in his 20s to be able to convince so many different people to help him out. This is just a random kid trying to make a movie. A lot of people went to bat for him. So Townsend directed a movie that, in the early 90s, that in certain quarters is considered a huge success. It didn't do that well at the box office. It was called The Five Heartbeats, about a band. I think the movie is set in the 60s. But there were certain critics that, again, said this is one of the best kind of biographical style films of a band, the kind of rise and fall of a band. And it's a fictional band, but you could point to certain real life musical groups that the story sort of echoes. But he did a really good job directing that film. Even people who had issues with the story said, no, Townsend, this is a serious talent. This guy is a terrific filmmaker. And then he did a movie that there were certain people that thought it was going to be a huge success called Meteor Man, about a superhero who's not really a superhero. I remember when it was getting ready to come out, and it bombed. It absolutely tanked at the box office. And his career it's not that it cratered, but he didn't reach the heights from a directing perspective as maybe some people thought. But he continued to work, and well into the 2000s, he made a film with Ving Rhames, which had been in the pipeline for years, where Ving Rhames plays the kind of tragic former world heavyweight champion, the Mike Tyson of his day, if you will, Sonny Liston. And once again, there were certain people that said, oh my God, this is fantastic. Didn't get great reviews. It didn't get much of a release. It just kind of came out and didn't go anywhere. It's very difficult to do biopics like that, especially if you don't have an unlimited budget. And in the case of Robert Townsend in that film, he didn't. Sonny Liston, of course, was a tragic figure. He died under a cloud of suspicion and a cloud of mystery. And to this day, his murder is unsolved. There are people that are convinced he committed suicide. I don't think he committed suicide. I think the Vegas mob rubbed him out. But that's neither here nor there. Hollywood Shuffle is streaming free on Tubi. It's also on Pluto, so if you get either of those, you can see it. You don't have to pay a couple of bucks. It's available on all of the streamers like Amazon Prime and Apple for either $2 or $3. It is a really good movie, even though some of the humor is going to be dated. A little bit of topical humor here and there, and the kind of running gag with Eddie Murphy. But it is a film that I don't know anybody who has seen it who has not really enjoyed it. It has a good message, and you just watch Robert Townsend, you watch the gears turning, and how good his performance is. And I don't know if he was up, I want to say he was up for a few Independent Spirit Awards. I'm not 100% on that, but he really gives a terrific three-dimensional performance as his character of Bobby Taylor goes from, I'm going to be the next De Niro, even in the 80s, I'm going to be the next De Niro, come hell or high water, to starting to get the idea that, well, maybe there's something else I can do within the field of acting. Maybe I don't have to be De Niro. Maybe I can just be Bobby Taylor. And you wouldn't think that this would be the sort of film that would give you a lump in the throat and have a very kind of positive and heartwarming message, even after all of the lampooning and the gentle ribbing directed at Hollywood. But it is, and it does. This almost rises to the level of a great, great film. I would give it 3.5 stars out of 4, but the 88% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes is not like just out of courtesy. It's out of the fact that this film is a really good story, kind of heartwarming in its way, and it is funny as fuck. Hollywood Shuffle from 1987, directed by, written by, produced by, and starring the undersold major talent that was and is Robert Townsend, the newest entry in our continuing series of the best movie you've never seen. This has been episode number 447 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Sunday afternoon here with me in New York. And if you checked out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then,